Hi. I'll preface this by saying that everything associated with cinema is expensive. A big part of the reason for this is that cinema gear is produced in small quantities. It's generally handmade and not mass-produced. Most cinema gear is rented. Generally, folks don't buy it. They rent it for a given project, and that's it. That being said, there are certain things that will be purchased, such as a Steadicam rig, which can run upwards of $25,000 US. Since most Steadicam operators make their living just using that rig, it's common for them to buy their own rig as part of the cost of doing business and then charging a rental fee to the production company for its use. This also allows them to customize the rig to their liking. It's also not uncommon for cinematographers to purchase cameras and/or lens sets. Again, they'll typically rent these items back to productions that they are hired for in order to recoup the costs of purchasing them. This allows them to test and practice their craft during downtimes. This video will focus on spherical cinema lenses, but the same differences will apply to anamorphic cinema lenses. Let's start things off by looking at the physical differences between still lenses and cinema lenses. Looking at the obvious physical differences between a cinema lens and a still camera lens, a cinema lens is typically larger in diameter than its equivalent still lens. Part of this is due to the fact that a cinema lens's focus throw will be much longer than a still lens. Since it's common practice for a cinema lens to be refocused during a given shot, a greater amount of fine control is needed, and the larger lens barrel is a result of the focus ring being larger, which is needed in order to facilitate the finer focus control needed for cinema. Changing the focus during a shot in cinema is referred to as pulling focus. As you can see, the focus control on this still lens is much shorter, and the adjustment is much coarser than on this cinema lens, which offers much finer control. Notice that the cinema lens has two controls on it, the iris control and the focus control, and both of these have gear teeth. This allows for the use of tools to assist in the control of exposure and focus. It's typical for a cinema lens to have a device like this attached to it called a follow focus that eases the job of the first assistant cameraman to control the focus and iris. The iris control on the lens does not have click-stop detents like a still camera lens has. This is so that the iris can be adjusted during a shot without having a stepped appearance from the click stops. There are also several servo versions of these controls for remote control of the camera. Many times the camera may be located in a spot where it's not practical for the assistant to reach the lens, and in those instances, a remote servo system will be used. The cinema lens is also marked differently from the still lens. The still photographer is typically going to look at the f-stop and focus markings on the lens by looking down on the lens barrel from the top. The cinema lens has its markings on the side of the lens, as the first assistant cameraman will typically be at the side of the camera. Traditionally, the top of the camera would have been sporting a large film magazine anyway. The lens markings are also typically duplicated on each side of the lens so the assistant can use either side. And while not all cinema lenses have large barrels, most do, and cinema lenses typically will not be able to use the screw-in lens filters commonly found and used on still lenses like these. In order to use one or more filters on a cinema lens, a matte box is typically used with large rectangular filters that fit into the matte box in front of the lens. Still lenses use f-stops and cine lenses use t-stops, f which stands for focal length and t which stands for transmission numbers. The f-stop is a theoretical value while the t-stop is an actual tested value. So while both the Zeiss Otis 55mm f1.4 and the Zeiss Otis 85mm f1.4 lenses have a wide open f number of 1.4, they actually transmit different amounts of light. According to DX0Mark's tests, the 55mm Otis transmission is T1.5, while the 85mm Otis transmission is T1.7. Same f-stop, different t-stops. It's more expensive to calibrate and measure a lens to give it a t-stop value. However, in cinema, since the DP lights a scene for a specific t-stop, he needs to be able to depend on every lens being calibrated accurately for proper exposure. Additionally, if they want to change lenses during a scene, they need to know that the T2.8 is the same on every lens. F-stops on still lenses all vary slightly. As a general rule, still lenses use less iris blades than cinema lenses. This is part of why cine lenses cost more. 7 or heptagon and 55mm 2.8 here. This 180 2.8 has 9 or nonagon. Longer still lenses tend to have 1 or 2 more blades than their wider counterparts. This Zeiss CP.2 cinema lens has 15 iris blades. I'll preface this by saying there's nothing wrong with the look that a lower number of iris blades will give you. It's purely a personal preference for the look you want or need. In this example, I have a string of small incandescent bulbs. Our first example here is a still lens with a 7-bladed iris. If the lens is wide open, like now, and we take the shot out of focus, the bokeh remains circular or elliptical, depending on the angle. The point is that the edges of the bokeh elements are smooth. Now I'll stop the lens down 2 stops and narrow the iris opening. Now when I take the shot out of focus, the bokeh has a heptagon shape to it due to the 7-bladed design of the iris in this still lens. Here I have a cinema lens that has 18 blades. Again, wide open, the bokeh is smooth and round or elliptical. I close down 2 stops and take it out of focus again, and the bokeh remains smooth and circular as you can see here. Again, this is a personal preference, but a lot of DPs want this super smooth look to the out-of-focus highlights in the background of their shots, and cinema lenses provide that effect. When a lens is refocused during a shot, it will exhibit an artifact known as breathing. Almost all lenses suffer from this artifact. Since still lenses don't change focus during a given shot unless you're focus stacking, which is an entirely different challenge, the manufacturers of still lenses don't try to mitigate this effect. There's no reason for them to do so. The effect manifests itself as slight changes in the field of view as well as image compression while pulling focus during a shot. Compression that's similar to what you would see with switching between, say, a 50mm lens and a 200mm lens. Cinema lenses, however, do try to mitigate this effect since it can be distracting for the viewer of a given shot where the lens is refocused. In this shot, I have a wine bottle in the foreground and one in the background. I'll refocus on the background and we'll take a look at the breathing effect. Our first shot here is with a Canon 50mm still lens. The red bar is showing that the counter is below the top of the red line. The second shot is done with a Zeiss 50mm cine lens. After I refocus to the background, you can see the red line does not extend past the top of the counter, and this is the compression effect that I mentioned. A cinema lens is designed to mitigate this artifact. Our final consideration for this brief comparison is optical performance. Cine lenses tend to have extraordinarily high-quality coatings on them. These coatings will allow the lens to both render color and contrast much more accurately than a still lens. These coatings also mitigate lens flare and internal lens reflections. In the pursuit of creating the highest quality images, cine lenses will also employ the highest quality optical glass to be used in the lenses. As previously noted, cine lenses are entirely made by hand hand with great care and precision. It's also very common for these lenses to be produced in matched sets. These matched sets allow the cinematographer to change between the lenses, confident that the color, contrast, and quality will match across all of the lenses. This is extremely important when you consider a single scene might have a shot one day, and then the next, weeks later, as well as changes in exterior lighting and other considerations. Okay, I hope this helps you understand the differences between these types of lenses. Bear in mind, there's nothing wrong with using a still lens for cinema. If it fits the aesthetic that you're attempting to achieve, then clearly it's the right tool for the job. Paul Thomas Anderson used a 55mm f2.8 micro Nikkor still lens during the production of The Phantom Thread. His budget allowed him to rent the highest quality cinema lenses, but for his vision for a specific set of scenes, he chose a $400 still camera lens. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching this video. If you liked it, please click like, as that'll help other folks find it. And until the next video, take care.